Damien Evans, the director of the University of Sydney's Archaeological Research Centre here in Cambodia. The University of Sydney's been involved in the work for 13 years now here at Angkor, and we found similar things in different areas and different places, but it's been a very gradual process over the course of a decade or more, whereas what we have now with this instrument is just bang, all of a sudden an immediate picture of an entire city that people didn't know was there before, which is remarkable. So instead of this kind of very long gradual process, you have this kind of sudden eureka moment where you bring the data up on screen for the first time, and there it is, this ancient city very clearly in front of you. Today what we've been doing is basically going around to different areas in this Phnom Kulen zone that we've identified as being areas of interest using the LiDAR data.
I'd rather go right there. As you can see, our guide is missing a leg.
According to the GPS, we've just arrived at the outside edge of the dome field. And you see the slope of the land going up here. This is just the edge of the dome. So we're just about to climb up onto the top of the first of the domes in this big field.
So what looks to be just forest or scrubland, kind of empty landscape, actually we can see from above very clearly used to be part of the medieval urban fabric of Angkor. And so there are these features like roadways, canals, and these very strange kind of domes, we call them, these big mounds on the landscape that we need to go and investigate on the ground just to see what they actually are. It's not enough just to kind of look from the air and see these things and say, oh, hey, there's an Angkorian feature. We actually need to go out and verify what we're seeing on the ground as well, which is not an easy business, but it's necessary to do at least part of it.
So, by and large, the remains of the temples have disappeared or are buried. Sometimes the temples may have even been made of wood, but a surefire way of telling that this was a temple is the existence of one of these pedestals here. So every tower during the Angkor period had one of these pedestals right in the middle of the tower, which was where the central statue was placed into this pedestal. This one's fallen on its side, but we know very clearly that this was a temple on account of this being here.
Axis of
it's not in the axis, no, it reached a corner somehow.
Northwest on
Wow,
it's
cool.
that's way cool, actually.
380 meters.
So new model? You've never seen anyone like this?
It's half and half. It's some kind of transitional thing between a pre-Angkorian and an Angkor. It's a hybrid.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Wow. So Tagannalinga sits in the middle of this here.
Oh, whoa.
There are a lot of temples known previously in this Phnom Kulen area, several dozen temples, but it was previously understood to be just a collection of isolated temples. So if you looked at a map of this area, you'd see a scatter of points just kind of here and there in the forest. The dimension that the LiDAR has added to that picture is basically to fill in the blanks between those points on the map. So now instead of isolated points, we have a whole network of highways, of roadways, of urban features like these strange domes, which kind of links everything together, and we can see quite clearly for the first time, the layout of the city, and so we don't just have this very partial view from structures like this one behind me. We have pretty much a much more complete picture of the urban landscape, and it allows us to come to much better conclusions about what went on in places like this.
Our main goal, if we talk about the archaeological activities, is to map the mountain, to research and to excavate any archaeological sites, and to implicate the government into the conservation of those sites. Their result has brought basically, it's like if you have the church of a town on our western wall, but you can see only the ruins of the church, but now we have the cities, the boulevard, the avenues, the canal, the hydrological system. So we had bits of it, we had the main dikes, the main canal, but we couldn't imagine that was such an intense occupation, an intense modification of the landscape. Also, they must have cut a lot of forest at that time to do all these features. What is very surprising also is that very similar to Angkor, which means it's very orientated east-west or north-south, which is easy to do on a flat plane like Angkor, but in Kolean it's still the main constraint for us before the LiDAR was the topography, which is not really flat, and also the vegetation. And with a tool like a LiDAR, you kind of avoid and have a great image of a city coming out. So it's a great input, but still years of work coming on.
The reason that we're here, and the reason why this place is really interesting, although it just looks like a rice field around us, actually if you look from above and have a kind of aerial perspective, you can see that this is actually a temple site. So this mound that's right behind me here is in the center of a large enclosed complex which would have housed the temple. This is actually incredibly unique in terms of this area, in terms of it being unlooted. So it's completely undisturbed by looters. So this is one of the real advantages of the LiDAR, is that you can see things on the landscape that are so subtle that even looters, local people and so on don't know that they were temples. You know, they would have no conception of this being a temple at one stage. So we can see that it is, though, not only from this aerial perspective, but the reason why we go tramping through the jungle for extended periods of time is to confirm the fact that it was a temple using stuff like this that we find on the ground. So what we have here is a brick, which signifies that this was a religious structure, because all non-religious structures were made of wood. So this is basically a temple devoted probably to a god. We don't see many of these bricks. There's not much evidence of this around here, and that's largely because this temple is unlooted, so the looters haven't dug down and thrown material all over the place. But it's very clear that this is a temple site, so it's quite an amazing discovery.
You know, the Angkor area is so much more than just a single temple. I mean, people normally associate Angkor with just Angkor Wat, not realizing actually that it's a collection of at least 1,000 temples scattered over a huge area of, you know, several hundred square kilometers. And so actually the Kolean is just kind of one component of that extended landscape. And for instance, the water that we see behind us here, this is the water that flows down into the huge reservoirs. This is the water that they use for irrigation to sustain the civilization. So where we are here, the Kolean Mountains, was an integral component of Angkor. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we had reasonable expectations, I guess, of what we would find using the LiDAR data, but what we've ended up with has just blown our minds. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible what we can see. I mean, it's far exceeded our expectations in terms of the features that we've uncovered, how clearly we can see things like temples, the new things that we had no idea that were there. I mean, it's really the future of remote sensing in archaeology, and I would expect in 5 or 10 years' time for it to be absolutely routine. The next step from here, I mean, the way forward probably is to increase our coverage, to increase the aerial extent, because you can see in the mapping work that Stefan has done, you know, the new features extend right to the end of to the edge of the LiDAR data, and that's just because the LiDAR data ends there. I mean, it's almost certain that this city was much larger than this picture that we're seeing from our very limited coverage. So I guess from my point of view, the next step will be to try and increase and expand that coverage, so we can get a really complete picture of what these cities look like. But that of course takes a lot of money. It's an expensive technology, and so we have to work pretty hard towards fundraising, convincing people that it's worthwhile, and so on, which is a big challenge. But like I said, I think in a few years this will be an absolutely routine thing, but we're just kind of pioneering the approach, I guess, here in Angkor.